Okay, today we're looking at the 45, 45, 90 triangles. We have a special rule that applies to 45, 45, 90 triangles, and we'll kind of look at it right here. What a 45, 45, 90 triangle is a right triangle with angle measures of 45 and 45 degrees. Obviously, since their two angles are the same measure, it's an isosceles triangle, which means opposite sides are congruent. Now, these congruent sides are the legs of our right triangle, and the side opposite our 90-degree angle is our hypotenuse. Another way of remembering that is the hypotenuse does not make up the 90-degree angle. The two legs are part of the 90-degree angle, but the hypotenuse does not touch that 90-degree angle. So there's a special way that using the 45, 45, 90 triangle theorem, we can find the measure of the other two angles given one of the angles. Now, if I have a 45, 45, 90 triangle, and if one is 45, we obviously know the other one is going to be 45. And I have an angle measure. Suppose that I have a leg of 3. Well, since these two sides are congruent, we know that the other leg is going to be 3. And we could do the Pythagorean theorem. We could say 3 squared plus 3 squared equals c squared. 9 plus 9 equals c squared, which is 18. Take the square root of both of those, and that c ends up equaling 3 radical 3. But a shortcut, and you might want to include this in your notes, if we're going from the leg to the hypotenuse, all we have to do is multiply the leg times radical 2, which would mean it would be 3 radical 2. Again, we found this, and actually I put 3. I'm getting my notes ready for 30, 60, 90, so sorry about that. It should have been 2. 8 radical 18 simplified would have been that, 3 radical 2, which is what we get when we take our leg, 3, multiply it times radical 2, 3 radical 2. Okay, now in the opposite way, if we're going from the hypotenuse backwards, if we know the hypotenuse and we don't know the leg, then we're going to divide the hypotenuse by radical 2. So we're just going the opposite direction. Let's look at a couple examples here. So here's A. We have a 45, 45, 90 triangle. Notice these are congruent, which means this side is also 14. But remember, if we're going from leg to hypotenuse, which you should have copied down their notes, we're going to multiply 14 times radical 2, which is just 14 radical 2. Pretty simple there. Let's look at another example. Okay, so now I have my leg. This leg we know is going to be congruent, 5 radical 2. But if we're multiplying, or if we're finding x, we're going to take 5 radical 2 and multiply it times radical 2, because we're going to from leg to hypotenuse. Well, when I do this, my answer is 10. If you're using a calculator, it should give you 10. If you're not using a calculator, just know that 5 radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4. Square root of 4 is 2, which is 10, which is what our x is equal to. Okay, let's look at example C. Here we have the hypotenuse. So remember, this is the example where I'm going backwards. So I have 210 degrees, and instead of multiplying it times radical 2, I'm going to divide by radical 2. We can't have a radical 2 in the denominator, so we multiply that by radical 2 over radical 2. When I multiply these two numbers, I get radical 4 When I multiply these two numbers, I get 210 radical 2. Well, radical 4 is equal to 2. And then I can simplify this fraction and end up with 105 radical 2. Like I said, your calculator, if you have the correct one, can do that for you. Otherwise, just follow those steps right there. This is going to be the hardest problem that you will see in your assignment for these types of triangles. Let's go ahead and look at the homework and see if we see another one like it. Okay, actually, let's look at number 1 here, just to try one of these out. Well, we're looking for x, and we're looking for y. This is a leg, so those two are congruent. So what is y? It's going to be radical 2 because they're congruent. Now to go from leg to hypotenuse, I take radical 2 and I multiply it times radical 2. That equals radical 4. Square root of 4 is 2. Okay? Let's look at number 2 here. Now I have the hypotenuse, which is 4 radical 2. That's given to me. So if I'm going from hypotenuse to leg, I divide by radical 2. And this one's convenient because those will cancel out, and I'm left with 4. So A equals 4, and B equals 4. Okay, we'll look at number 4, and then one more. Similar situation. I've got my hypotenuse, so I'm going to take my hypotenuse, divide it by radical 2. I can't have a radical 2 in the denominator, and anytime we multiply a radical times itself, it eliminates the radical, and I'm left with 2. Multiply these two, I get 8 radical 2. I can simplify this fraction into 4 radical 2. So that is the leg. A equals 4 radical 2. B is congruent, so B also equals 4 radical 2. Let's look at one more. Okay, number 12 is very similar to that, but it's got one issue that makes it a little different. We've got the hypotenuse, which is 9. We want to find the leg, so we're going to take 9, divide by radical 2. Well, again, we're going to multiply it times radical 2 over radical 2, and we get 9 radical 2 when we multiply those two. When I multiply these two, radical 2 times radical 2 is 2. Now, that is my answer. That's the only reason I worked on this, is because you're going to have problems that don't look real nice. So you have a couple of them that look like that. That's the first one on the assignment, but you'll have a few more. I believe number 14 looks kind of funny like that. 15, those other two look like number 12. So, all right, that's all for this assignment.